G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the top 3 exercises to solve your shoulder blade pain. Now I know if you're watching this video and you've obviously got some shoulder blade pain and have had it in the past, you'll understand that it's not necessarily the most sort of devastating of shoulder injuries. Like if we compare it to something like a subluxed shoulder, arthritis, a biceps rupture, all these sorts of things, shoulder blade pain probably doesn't rank as highly in the list of those really bad, nasty issues, but it tends to rank highly on the list of shoulder issues that sort of bubble along under the surface, or those chronic type shoulder problems that seem to just annoy us every day. It may not stop you from doing something, but you'll certainly notice it a lot throughout the day, and a lot of people struggle to get rid of it. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll understand why, but also how to get rid of it, which is really important. And I think conceptually, it's a lot more simple than it often appears. So we'll touch on what it is in a second and I guess clear up some common misconceptions around shoulder blade pain. But then we'll get into some 3 exercises that will hopefully fix it for you. And we'll talk at the end, I guess the main concept or the main idea that you need to focus on if you really want to solve it and keep it feeling good forever. So before we get into the video, obviously, if you go on to enjoy this and if you find it useful, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know, how you feel about it. Let me know how your shoulder blade pain is going, how long you've had it for. It just helps me make these videos more specific and more useful for you guys. And of course, if you did enjoy it, please consider leaving a like down below, and also consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. It really helps support the channel. It helps these videos get out to more people, which is the ultimate goal, obviously, to help as many people as possible. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Now, getting into the crux of the video, when we talk about shoulder blade pain, we're often talking about pain that feels like it's sort of on the inside of that shoulder blade at the back, or it almost feels like it's underneath that shoulder blade. And the reason for that is there's a lot of soft tissue that can be underneath the shoulder blade when those shoulders are back. And I think a lot of people define their shoulder blade pain, or at least the most common definition of shoulder blade pain, come from trigger points or those tiny little bits of muscle spasm that tend to make us feel a bit sore and uncomfortable sort of regularly throughout the day. Now, the thing that I want to clear up about this, and we've done a video on this concept before, but it's really important for this, for us to understand why it's there and to help us solve the problem long term, is that knots and muscle spasm in that area, they're not there for no reason, or there's a very simple reason why those things are there in the first place. So if you're someone who consistently gets trigger point therapy or constant massage through those areas, there'll be a very distinct reason why you haven't felt like it's been solved yet, or you feel like those knots keep coming back, and why it's not necessarily getting you to where you want to be long term. And that's because those knots, those trigger points, those muscular spasms in that area are directly reacting to some underlying thoracic joint or thoracic rib joint dysfunction. Now that can be joint stiffness, that can be joint like an overload or even an irritation of those joints at the end of the day. But the ultimate underlying cause of those sort of shoulder blade pains that we feel are often the overloaded joints beneath the muscle tissue that's spasmed and tightened up. So again, if you're always getting that massage, if you're having trigger point therapy to release that, and you're not addressing the underlying rib cage stiffness or the thoracic spinal joint stiffness, those tissues are going to have to keep retightening and keep staying sore until that's resolved. So the exercises that we're going to go through, a couple of them are going to help to address the way that we load that up and hopefully undo some of that chronic underlying overload of the tissues that set that tissue up to be there. So the first thing that we want to get you to do, basically, we use the ball a lot on the channel. This is just a simple lacrosse ball. The best way that I've ever seen to quickly and effectively unglue overloaded, stiff, tight and overloaded rib cage joints, those costovertebral joints at the back, is with a ball. Now, if you're quite tender back there, please feel free to use a tennis ball. But for anyone else who feels like they need a little bit of extra pressure, or maybe it's not too tender and you're happy to dig something like this in there, a lacrosse ball is fantastic. And basically what we want to get you to do is, obviously from the inner border of the shoulder blade to the thoracic spine itself, we want to place the ball in the middle there somewhere. And we want to get you guys to lie down on the floor, but for the purposes of this, I'll do it up against the door here. So all we want to get you to do basically is move the ball around until you feel like you hit something that feels a little bit stiff, tight or tender. Now, you may hit some of those trigger points, and you'll certainly be able to get those trigger points to release by doing this, but the goal isn't to release those trigger points. It's more of an added benefit. The the overarching goal is to try and get underneath that to the stiffness in the joints below that, so the muscles don't feel like they have to keep retightening over the top. Now, the other thing that a lot of people do with this exercise that probably isn't as effective as it could be is a lot of people get a ball out and start to sort of roll around and try and sort of pancake and self-massage those tightnesses and stiffnesses away. It's nowhere near as effective as moving the ball around. So for me, there's a spot just here that feels a little bit tight and tender. You just want to move the ball around until you feel like you hit something that feels interesting, and then you want to stay there. So you want that constant specific pressure to sink through that soft tissue onto the underlying joints below, and you want to stay there until those joints start to give and start to free up. Now you might find that feels a little bit less, that you might find that sort of comes in the form of less tenderness or less stiffness. But the idea is that once you've found a spot that you feel is quite useful, and again, you might need to almost hug yourself a little bit to sort of bring your shoulder blades out the way so you can get the ball into some deeper spots. But once you've found a spot that's genuinely important for you, make sure that you're spending time on that spot so that it frees up and that underlying joint stiffness frees up as well. And again, once you've done this, move up to the next spot, move out a little bit more laterally towards the shoulder blade, more onto the rib cage. Follow that all the way up and down until you feel you've got a really good account of any tenderness or tightness or stiffness that you might be able to find. Now, it's really, really important because that soft tissue over the top needs to give, but the stiffness underneath needs to go away. And if you want to add something to this, what we can get you to do basically is once you've found a spot that feels particularly stiff, hopefully not too tender, you can start to add movement to that to shear that soft tissue free, but also sort of in a respectful way, force those underlying joints to move via shoulder movement. And what you'll find is you might start off with your arm coming up maybe 90% of the way, and then you might find you hit some underlying stiffness, but then the more you oscillate in and out of that stiffness, the further that goes back until you feel like it's pretty much reaching the surface that you're on. So again, you can do this on the floor. It's a really nice way to relax, but you need to be looking and hunting around for all of those stiff, tight spots, hopefully the symptomatic spots that you're feeling day to day, and want some constant pressure from the ball to get into those tight spots, to free them up and to stop it from coming back. Now, so exercise number one is genuinely just grabbing a ball, trying to sort of get after all the symptoms that you're feeling, but also sinking through that to free up that deeper stiffness, like we said. The other thing that we can do on top of that is we can ask the soft tissue over the top, the symptomatically tight and spasm soft tissue that accounts for most shoulder blade pain. We can now start to do an exercise to try and get that tissue to free up a lot more as well. So if you're already addressing that underlying joint stiffness and also some soft tissue stuff with the ball, obviously, we can then use a band of some sort. Now, again, this is just a power band or a jump stretch band, depending on what you want to call it. You can use a TheraBand if you want to. Any stretchy band is fantastic for this. And what we want to get you to do here is it's very similar to the across the body stretch that a lot of people do, but it's a lot more effective and it's a lot more sort of faster acting. So what we want to get you to do is obviously you can grab the band, but because this is a loop, I'm going to slide my hand into this, reach over the top. And what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to pull back so I've got enough tension on the band. So again, if you're grabbing the band, because there's no loop, it's the same thing, but we want to basically rotate your palm up. We want to create that external rotation first to create a really stable shoulder joint. So we're not hopefully going to get as much distraction at the shoulder joint. We're going to be able to pull that shoulder blade away from that thoracic spine at the back if there's more sort of stability here. So what we want to get you to do is we're going to get you to turn your trunk towards the arm. And I like to grab the band or grab my hand at the top here to hold that into an externally rotated position. Up nice and tall, and we're turning away, and you'll feel a really strong pulling feeling where your shoulder blade musculature is. So inside that shoulder blade towards the thoracic spine. And if you really want to make it more specific, and again, if you're doing this standing, you can do it kneeling as well, is that if you then hinge forward from the hips and lean forward, you'll find it hits a different piece of that shoulder blade at the back. It might be down a little bit lower. So we want to get you guys to hold that for about a minute or two. And then what you can do once you're in that position is, again, you've rotated around, you've blocked that position. you've rotated across to feel the stretch, maybe you've leant forward to isolate it even more, then what I want to get you to do is wherever you feel that tightness at the back, just try and squeeze that tightness, try and tense up that tightness. So you can squeeze the muscles in your shoulder, try and squeeze the muscles in your shoulder blade. You can even try and pull the band towards you a little bit. So in this motion to try and sort of pull the shoulder blade back towards you. But ultimately we want to find the stretch, activate those tight muscles for about 5 seconds, then relax, and then you might find you can go a little bit further into the stretch and so on and so forth. And what you'll find after doing that is you'll feel like those shoulder blade muscles are all of a sudden a lot looser than before. And if you have some specific areas that are tender and sore for you, perhaps chronically, see if you can target those areas and get those tissues to give a little bit faster by tensing them up while you're in that position. It's that proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation type technique, the PNF stretching. It's the best way to stretch, period. So once you've cleared up some of that hidden underlying joint stiffness, you've softened up some of the trigger points and some of that soft tissue by activating them and stretching them apart, you should feel like those symptoms are starting to feel a little bit better. Now, the third exercise ties into this overarching idea of why these tissues have become overloaded and irritated in the first place. And the main idea that we want to create here is it's a strength exercise that we're about to do, but the main exercise or the main idea why these things happen is we often spend far too much time in a rounded, slouchy posture. Now, that can be sitting at a computer, sitting at a desk, driving, sitting on the couch, watching TV. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is, but if you're spending some time with your shoulders sort of dropping and rolling forwards, all of those tissues that have become irritated and sore that are creating that shoulder blade pain are the tissues that you're directly hanging off by being in that position. So over time, the joints have to become a bit stiffer, the muscles have to become a little bit tighter and potentially spasm in order to sort of support you in that position unknowingly. So all this is happening without you necessarily realize it's happening. But the point of this conversation is to say that if you can be aware that these positions are the ones that are most likely setting those shoulder blade tissues and that shoulder blade area up to become sore, then we need to make sure that you're getting into a better position where you're taking the slack away from that, feeding some slack into that area, taking the pressure away from those spots so they're not having to consistently stiffen, tighten and become tender long term. And one of the reasons, one of the ways that we can do that is again with this TheraBand. So you can use weights, you can use cables, you can use anything in particular. But the idea that we want to promote here is we want to do a rowing exercise. So we want to create some extra strength by pulling those shoulder blades back over and over and over and over again to strengthen the muscles that are becoming overloaded and irritated by being in a bit of a slouchy, rounded posture. And we don't necessarily want to add strength to those muscles, not just strength, but we want to add a lot of endurance to those muscles as well, because holding good posture, particularly at a computer or at a desk or when you're driving, is an endurance event. It's not who can hold their posture the strongest, it's who can hold their shoulders in a good position as long as possible. How long can you hold on for until you start to lose those positions long term? So what we want to get you to do with a band or with some weights, you can definitely do some high weight numbers if that's what you're into, but you've got to make sure that you're spending time doing high repetitions of an exercise like this, where you're trying to pull your shoulders back, pull those shoulder blades back, fatigue those muscles over time. So an endurance dosage for some simple rows would be something like 15 to 20, 25 to 30. You might find that the resistance is a little bit lower, but we want to do enough repetitions so you really feel like you start to fatigue those muscles. You're telling them that they're not strong enough or they don't have enough endurance. So that good nutrition, good sleep, you come back the next day and they're a little bit better based on the demands that you're asking. So repetitions of these rows are really, really important to get those muscles, to give those muscles the endurance that they need to keep holding you into a good position long term. Now, the really important thing to touch on with this is when you're doing a rowing exercise, a lot of people have a tendency to pull the band or the cable or the weight to their trunk. And again, it's an instinctive thing that we complete that movement by doing this. But what you'll notice when I get to this point is that it's very, very easy for my elbows to go past my trunk and my shoulders to dump forward, which is essentially a bad pattern that a lot of people get into. And it's very similar to the same pattern that we end up in when we slouch. So what I recommend for a lot of people So don't get me wrong, you should have the capacity to do this in a good posture with good technique. But for a lot of people, a great fix for that is not to pull the band or the cable or the weight back to your trunk and at least set you up for that position. We'll get you to pull the band back until your elbows are level with your trunk. So until you end up in a good posture. So depending on how long your forearms are, you might find that you'll end up about maybe 6 inches, if not more, away from your trunk. But the point is that your elbows come back level with your shoulders, and it makes it a little bit easier to pull those shoulder blades back from this position, as opposed to this position feels a little bit more awkward. So try it for yourself because you'll see a bit of a difference. But pulling back so that your elbows are level with your trunk essentially leaves you, finishes you in a good posture, which is ultimately the goal. So we're trying to get you to feel like you can strengthen the muscles, give them a lot more endurance at the back without sort of encouraging those tissues to dump forwards like a lot of people can tend to when they bring their hands to their trunk. So those 3 exercises, the ball exercise to address any of the underlying critically important rib joint stiffness or thoracic joint stiffness. A simple stretch, again, you don't need the band to do this, but it does help to really distract that shoulder blade away. Gives you something to pull back against to enjoy the PNF side of things. And then obviously adding some endurance to those muscles, the ones that hold you back in a good position, so that ultimately you can stay out of those rounded, slouchy shapes that are very, very likely to be causing that shoulder blade pain in the first place. So again, if you're looking to fix those issues, if you've had some pain around that shoulder blade for a long time, if you're not mastering each of those 3 things, but ultimately making sure that you're correcting and maintaining good shoulder posture for as long as humanly possible, particularly when sitting, then it's very, very hard to feel like you've fixed the problem long term. But what you'll hopefully find is that you can change these things very, very quickly. Even if you've had some chronic issues for a while, if you spend a couple of nights on the ball, you might find that you can completely change how that feels very quickly. And then you can add on some extra mobility and some extra endurance on top of that while you're trying to work on your postural habits day in, day out. So hopefully that really helps give you guys a really narrow, streamlined vision of how to change that shoulder blade pain for good. Again, let me know in the comments below. Let me know how you found the exercises. Go away, do them, come back and let me know. Just so that we can make sure that these videos are very effective and they're really helping as many people as possible. So as always, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed that a little bit, and we'll see you guys next time with hopefully something else that's quite useful and quite interesting.